If you're new to Spring Framework, you may be struggling to understand what it is, the problem it solves, its role in enterprise web and mobile applications, why is it so popular, and other similar queries. Adding to the confusion, Spring has a lot of modules like Spring Core, Spring Boot, Spring MVC, Spring Cloud, etc. And as a beginner, it's easy to get confused. In this video, I'll try to answer all of them in a beginner-friendly way. You can also find the video timelines in the description below. Let's get started. Before we understand what is Spring Framework, it's necessary that you know what are full-stack applications. Simply put, full-stack applications are basically a combination of front-end and back-end components, providing a complete user experience. The front-end or the user interface or UI is what users interact with directly. It includes elements like buttons, forms, and navigation menus, as well as the overall layout and design of the application. Technologies like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript frameworks like Angular, React, or Vue.js are commonly used in front-end development to create the visual and interactive aspects of the application that the users see and interact with in their web browsers. On a mobile device, you might use technologies like Java, Kotlin for Android, or Swift for iOS for user interactions. On the other hand, the backend or the server-side logic handles the behind-the-scenes operations of the application. This might include processing requests from the front end, interacting with the database, and performing business logic. Backend development typically involves languages like Java, Python, or Node.js, along with frameworks and databases to create server-side components that run on the server and communicate with the front end. For example, on the front end, you might have a contact form built using front-end frameworks. Once the customer fills the form and submits the details, the browser would then send the HTTP request to the server side, where the submitted details or the data would be processed. The data may then be stored in a database like PostgreSQL. Spring Framework has very little to do with the user interface, but a lot to do on the server side. But let us first understand what is a framework with a real-world example. Imagine you want to bake a cake from scratch. You could gather all the ingredients, develop your own recipe, and figure out the baking process on your own. This would be similar to writing server-side code from scratch in software development, where you have to handle every aspect of the application's architecture and functionality on your own. However, using a framework in software development is like using a cake mix. The framework provides you with pre-packaged set of ingredients and instructions that streamline the baking process. Just as with the cake mix includes pre-measured ingredients and instructions, a software framework provides you with a pre-written code, tools, and guidelines that help you develop your applications more efficiently. Moreover, just as the cake mix might include additional flavorings or toppings to customize your cake, a software framework might also include additional libraries and extensions that you can use to add additional functionality to your application. So much like how using a cake mix simplifies the baking process by providing pre-measured ingredients and instructions, using a framework simplifies the development process for software applications by providing pre-written code, tools, and guidelines. So now what is Spring Framework? Imagine you're writing server-side code. Does your application need to interact with a database? Well, instead of you writing the database code from scratch, you could use Spring Data module that comes with a ready-made code to interact with a database. Does your application need security features like authentication, authorization? Well, you can simply use Spring Security Library that will let you easily implement features like authorization, authentication, or protection against common security threats, etc. Do you want to easily manage logging? Well, you can use Spring AOP for that. Are you building a web application where you need to handle HTTP requests and build views? Well, you have Spring MVC for that. Similarly, there are tons of other modules or libraries that Spring offers, and depending on what you need in your application, you can use them. Apart from Spring modules, you also have Spring Core Container, which is the heart of the Spring framework. Spring Core Container manages and wires together all the components of your Spring application. Imagine your application as a collection of beans or objects, and Core Container as the magician that creates and connects these beans with the concept of dependency injection and inversion of control. Well, I cannot get into too much of detail right now, but dependency injection takes care of providing the objects with the dependencies they need. Instead of objects creating their own dependencies, the core container injects them into the objects when they are created. And we have inversion of control, or IOC. This is the magic behind the scenes. Normally in programming, you control the flow of your application by calling methods and creating objects. In IOC, the core container takes control and manages the flow for you. It decides when and how objects are created and wired together. We'll discuss more on it in another video. Inside the core container, you also have bean factory that creates and manages your beans. You provide the bean factory with the instructions, usually through configuration files or annotations, on how to create your beans, and it takes care of the rest. Finally, the core container also handles the life cycle of your beans. It knows when to create them, when to destroy them, and how to manage their state throughout the application's life cycle or the runtime. Basically, it's the core container you can run your Spring applications. If you want to dive deep into it, you can check out my other videos on dependency injection. Link is in the description below. And then you also have Spring Boot, which basically addresses the problems in Spring. It further simplifies application setup and configuration. Spring Boot auto-configures many aspects of your Spring application, reducing the need for manual configuration and boilerplate code. And you also have Spring Cloud to simplify the development of distributed systems and cloud-native applications. It provides a range of features and patterns for building resilient, scalable, and flexible microservice architecture. Next, you want to check out this particular video, which talks about step-by-step learning path to learn Spring Framework. I hope this is helpful. Please do like and subscribe, and I wish you good luck with your learning. Also, if you're learning Spring Framework, you can learn from me. Link is in the description below.